The highest level of competitive Fortnite, FNCS, has gone to the point where trading damage on huge towers like this has ruined a huge part of the game. In this video, I'm going to cover why almost every single team feels like they have to do this, but also how the winning team ended up actually setting up multiple counters to this strategy. If you've ever watched a competitive Fortnite match, you'll know the early game and the end game are very exciting. However, the 15 minutes between, the mid game, is often very dull. Since the objective of a battle royale is to survive to the end of the match, in Fortnite this is usually done just by sitting in a box. So back in the day, Epic Games added cash bonuses and point bonuses for players who drop high eliminations during this mid-game period, just to spice things up a little and make it much more fun to watch. Now, throwing cash at a problem only works for so long, so they ended up implementing the Storm Surge mechanic. Basically, the players who have dealt the least amount of damage will be hit by Storm Surge if there's too many players alive. This means those players can't just sit in a box and do nothing, as they'll actively have to shoot other people, which gives you as a viewer something to watch. And this was never exploited, ever. Now, I've done a lot of videos explaining Storm Surge already. This is not a basics of Storm Surge. This is the problems that we're running into, which have evolved in the meta over the years. Now, let's fly around the map in Game 1 of the FNCS Grand Finals from the most recent major and see what we can find. Here's Lone Wolf Lair looks like to the north. Here's the northwest. Here's the west. Here's the southwest. Here's the south. Here's the middle. I could go on, but I think you get the point. Lots of very large structures all pointing towards each other. So let's take a look at the north, as this was extremely relevant throughout the entire tournament. Marius, Pixie, and Vanya land at Flooded Frogs, and they can't deal damage to players who are at the opposite side of the map, so they have a few options on teams around them. They have Pablo, Fred, and Chino to the east at Supernova Academy, Panzer, Seti, and Yapko to the south at Lone Wolf Lair, Jules, Ghost, and Hyper to the northwest, and Mr. Savage, Chap, and Reason a little further to the west. Now, they could go and fight one of these teams, but this is a very high-risk play. If one player dies, then they have wasted a ton of time and resources, and then you have to reboot them, and you may even just get W-keyed after you reboot anyway, making your game even worse. So to maximize their damage, they tower south towards Lone Wolf Lair. Now, this is because the render distance to see other players is roughly 275 meters, so by ramping up and putting themselves in a position they have maximum visibility, this allows them to see more of the players around them and get more opportunities to get damage, keeping them above the Storm Surge thresholds. Now, this is kind of a natural evolution of the Storm Surge base, since it makes a lot more sense to position yourself closer to the teams actually around you, rather than just building directly up on top of a hill somewhere. The problem here is that when everyone does it, now you have 3 or 4 teams all ramping towards each other, just trading damage back and forth. And how are you meant to get damage if you're not doing this? Now look at Vanya's inventory here. A gold DMR, 5 medkits, 6 minis, and a med mist grenade, with a huge pile of extra heals behind him that Marius has dropped from. And all of the teams surrounding him are doing the exact same thing. 2 players on top of this tower, because if they get knocked, which they repeatedly do, they can just revive, and 1 at the bottom farming materials and then transferring heals up. As an example, in this game, Panzer gets knocked 5 different times while surge trading and gets revived every single one of them. And here's the thing, they'd get 4 elimination points if they actually managed to get the finish, but allowing them to revive and getting way more Storm Surge damage benefits them way more as they can get deeper into the game and therefore get more points. Now, by the end of the third zone, Vanya, Marius, and Pixie have dealt 1,935 damage, and they actually only needed 2,022 to cover them for the entire game. That meant that they were basically able to play the Storm for the 3rd, 4th, and 5th zones, avoiding every other player in the lobby for about 6 minutes. Now, I have a full video covering this already, so I won't go into too much detail on playing the Storm and the benefits of this, but basically, they could just avoid everyone for 3 full zones. Now, Kinch Analytics made a great tweet showcasing the damage dealt before the 5th zone for all teams, and Marius, Pixie, and Vanya only dealt 44 damage with a shotgun or SMG across all 12 games. That is before the 5th zone in all 12 of those games. This means that they didn't get into a single fight before the 5th zone across their entire 2-day long tournament. But does this not feel ban-worthy? Like, you can basically just bypass the Storm Surge mechanic entirely by intentionally not killing other players. Well, that's kind of complicated. Back in Chapter 2, Bucky and Creo, alongside Slacks and Keys, were banned for doing exactly this, but with way less tags and way less damage, which for a long time kind of set the precedent that this was considered teaming and it would be bannable. And then this didn't really take over the competitive landscape for years. But over the years, this still did happen, like Tayson and Murstache trading with Trulex and Chicho at the 2020 2023 FNCS Global Championship, and then in the 2024 Global Championships, this happened even more. But it wasn't every team in the lobby. You didn't have to trade damage to be above. But at the end of 2024, Epic made a decision just to allow teams to trade. In one Cash Cup finals, 2 Italian teams were trading damage back and forth with each other. Now, this was brought to light by Destiny's Jesus, and as you can see, the interactions in the comments were pretty interesting. Every single person is calling them cheaters and teamers, that they've planned this ahead of the time, and unsurprisingly, they got banned. Now, you may think, how is this Epic Games allowing this? Well, that's because they were unbanned 39 minutes later. In the same tournament, Kami's trio was trading with Giras's trio, which is 2 Polish teams, and both also did not get banned. Now, it seems strange to allow what is clearly unfair gameplay to happen and be unpunished for it, but this puts Epic Games in actually a very odd spot. If they ban the teams, how can they prove that each team agreed to do this and was actually teaming and cheating? What proof is there that both of the Polish teams or both of the Italian teams said, I'm going to base here, you base there, we'll trade back and forth and not push each other? Where is the proof that they actually pre-agreed to do this? Now, you could say it's obvious, which in a lot of cases it absolutely is, but if players are consistently in the same lobby over and over again, they will naturally come to figure out the positions that other teams will go to, and they'll get into spots to trade with them. It's all a bit awkward, so ultimately, as much as it sucks, banning people for trading is very difficult to do. And now, 10 months later, basically every single team in Grand Finals is trading to an extent. Now, early in this video, I didn't just choose Vanya, Marius, and Pixie to call them out by any means. They just traded better than anyone else. As I've already said, the vast majority of this lobby was trading Surge with other teams. It's just that they did it the most. Now, to clarify, the stats you're about to see from Frostbite cover all AR and DMR tags at range, so take the trading percentages with a grain of salt. Marius, Vanya, and Pixie traded 99.63% of their damage before the 3rd zone, the highest percentage of any team, so that's why they were a good example. And interestingly, if you look at the 3 teams that place below them on the leaderboards, they were also some of the biggest traders. But above them is interesting. Despite Surge trading being a huge problem, the top 2 teams actually didn't do this anywhere near as much as the rest of the leaderboard. I mean, they still did trade, but nowhere near as much. So how did they counter this meta? So as already mentioned, the winners, Ferdoxy, Chino, and Pablo, land as Supernova Academy, so they have the option of joining in this Surge trading, but that's not really what they decide to do in most of the games. Ferdoxy, Pablo, and Chino decide instead to fight teams for their Surge. Now this sounds like an obvious option, but when you start comparing it to trading, it really doesn't actually make that much sense for the vast majority of teams. In order to be at the top of the damage numbers by the end of the 3rd zone, teams were getting 1.5k to 2k damage total. Now remember, Surge damages the teams who do the least damage, so when there are some teams who are dropping insanely high amounts of damage, it raises the difficulty for everyone else. But let's actually run the numbers of a fight. Assume you win a 3v3 fight by wiping the trio and finish both of the 2 knocked bodies. That's 800 damage. So in order to match the 1.5 to 2k damage by the other top trading teams, you'd essentially need 6 elims worth of damage, which against the best players in the region isn't exactly a consistent strategy because it's very easy just to die. But what I fear for the world is what Ferdoxy's team has unleashed on it. Playing like rats. Let's take Game 6 as a great example to see how they actually deal with this weird meta. This is actually also a great example because they dealt the most damage before the 3rd zone of any team. Now they quick loot at their drop spot and immediately sprint over to Lone Wolf Lair, where they crouch up and jump onto Yapko for a free 300 damage and 4 elimination points. But remember, Yapko's team was the one Surge trading with Vanya, so Ferdoxy's team can then just take their place and then themselves trade with Vanya's team back and forth. At the same time, Chino can stay back, and rather than looting like other teams would, they've already looted, so they don't need anything else. So he just sits and keeps an eye out for Seti and Panzer, Yapko's teammates, to return. Then when they do return for the reboot card, which they're always going to because they can't get enough gold to buy it, that is a free 3v2 for them, which means more damage. So they don't need to go for 6 eliminations worth of damage, because instead they can get 1 or 2 and then just take over that team's Surge strategy. And then if the other teammates return, it's even more free damage. And this is pretty much what they did in a huge amount of their matches. If you watch, they are just crouching everywhere, always trying to get an instant kill onto one team who's unsuspecting it that drops around them. And they changed it up almost every single game, and clearly had a huge amount of different strategies prepared. So I do predict in the future that even more top level pro teams are just going to be crouching and sneaking and making little rat plays to try and get some easy elims and damage. Now the reason that everyone was playing in the Storm is actually extremely related to the Storm Surge trading meta. And if you want to learn about the Fortnite Pro's strangest strategy, you can click on this video right here. Peace.